You don't usually associate beautiful works of art with death.
Insanely dangerous.
More and more people are getting into.
A lot of people have tried this.
A dangerous technique.
I'm going to show you my new hobby.
Have you heard of
Fractal burning.
Fractal wood burning.
The house is on fire!
Homemade built devices from microwave parts.
2 individuals died.
You're gonna die.
One wrong move, and you would just end your life.
Harpoony bodies are simply no match for angry electrons.
So I'm gonna walk in. Hello. This is Constant Woodworks. Today, I'm gonna be sharing with you the story of how this lightning-like bench came to be, aspects of the design and crafting process, the do's and don'ts of fractal wood burning. The handle's on fire. Stab it. And how fear is driving the overzealous safety culture in Western society today.
You're gonna die.
How to deal with that. Keep watching to see how this chaos unfolds. First, a little bit of background. I got my hands on this old, broken, beaten up bench. This thing has seen better days. So I was like, well, instead of just making it like another typical bench like it was before, I wanted to do something special with it. I had actually bought this kit on Amazon about a year ago. Because I had messed around with it a little bit in the past, I knew that hickory wood worked really well with this Lichtenberg burning process. One, it's relatively inexpensive, and two, you get some really nice high detail patterns from the burning on it. So after doing the initial taking apart of it, stripping it down and seeing what I had to work with, after very importantly fueling up with a banana, I began montaging my way through this build. Everything that I would be reusing had to be cleaned because it was just covered in dirt and rust. So I started cutting out the wood slats, and as I was cutting them on my table saw, I definitely had some disagreements with my arch nemesis, the fuse box, because my oh my, it popped like 3 times, maybe 4. These pieces of hickory were causing me more problems than I'd like to admit. The hickory piece that probably took the most amount of time was the top curved piece. I ended up just using the original piece of wood that was on it as a template for it. I had the fractal wood burning in the back of my mind, right? So I had to shape, I had to sand, I had to cut, I had to do all of that stuff. Literally just finishing the bench, like as if I could have just slapped a finish on then and there, so that I could take it all back apart again to do this fractal wood burning to it. I almost forgot about this part. So I had these 2 clamps going the length of this 4-foot long bench so that I could try to place the wood slats where they needed to go so I could mark for the pre-drilling. This led to the biggest hiccup or issue that I had throughout this entire building process. As I was doing this, one of the legs gave way and it snapped at the bottom. Of course, I snapped the metal. I guess it's a pretty important part. Like, I thought this thing was all cast iron. I was so wrong. It took a hot minute to figure this one out. There's always a hiccup in a build, right? It's like, I'm gonna try to fix this. First thought was like, I'll buy a welder. I'll teach myself how to weld real quick. Then I saw the price of one. I was like, no. I was like, solder. I could probably solder this thing together, right? And then I eventually got to talking with an employee at Home Depot, and he gave me some very motivating advice. He said, it's highly unlikely, but it might work. And it did not work. I literally was just carrying around this metal leg with me, like trying to, can you help me fix this thing? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I had stopped at this other hardware store before, and this guy who was like handyman, and he was just like, probably some metal epoxy. So I was like, oh, yeah. Oh yeah, there's already a crack. If it never had to move again, it would probably work fine. Shit. Oh, that's right. My first attempt, I had cut this little metal rod that was like bendy, right? So I shaped this metal piece. You're refinishing a bench, you have cast iron legs. I don't recommend breaking a part of the leg. I just laid a thick layer of epoxy down on it, this UV epoxy. I was like, this'll work. And it did not. It was so far from it. No. Well, that didn't work at all. Well, I'm back to square one. I didn't think things could go any worse than they were with trying to get this leg fixed. And then I thought I was take a trip to my local mechanic. Shout out to Greg. But once Greg welded it up for me, I took it back to the shop, started spray painting, and I was like, this is great. As I was moving them around, I was lifting them by their armrest, but I was like, this thing's welded together. It broke off again. What? It popped off again. So that's just lovely. Then I was like, I have to scrap this bench. I left that day feeling rather defeated. Laying in bed that night, I thought to myself, I can fix it. I have to get a little creative with it and stick to what I know, especially. I know how to work with epoxy, and I know how to make really weird molds so that I can pour epoxy in really weird places. So that's exactly what I did. I made this really weird mold out of Tyvek tape and caulk.
It is normally pronounced as caulk.
Caulking, that is, to fully seal this very kind of awkward area on this bench's leg. It's literally been like 3 days since I did this pour. I'm gonna take it off and we'll see if this guy can be held in place. I definitely overdid it with the Tyvek tape and caulk. It was golden. It worked. I was like, holy epoxy is superior to welding. I was so relieved that it was holding and I was not going to have to scrap this bench. So finally, with all of the metal pieces spray painted, I ended up like also hanging them up to get a super consistent finish compared to what you saw me doing earlier with just leaning them up against a wall. So with all the metal pieces spray painted and all of the wooden slats parts that we're going to be making up the bench, once they were all sanded and shaped, I could finally move on to the fractal burning. So fractal wood burning. I've been talking about it and I deep dove into the history of it, how it works. And I spent most of my time researching how to do this safely.
You're gonna die.
Since knowledge is power, I will share this quick summary of the history of fractal wood burning with you. And then I'll address the safety later on in the video as I'm doing it to this bench. However, if you could give a shit about history and how fractal wood burning came to be, you can go to this time in the video. So what is fractal wood burning? Also known as Lichtenberg burning or wood fracking. The process involves using an electrically conductive solution on wood and then applying high voltage electricity through a transformer using two probes. When the electricity is applied, it burns from one probe to the other. These burns create a lightning-like image. Just to give you an idea how long these Lichtenberg figures, how long they've been around for, it was at a time when the Industrial Revolution and European colonization were in full swing. Everyone was either mass producing things, figuring out machinery, and like, this is awesome. Products, faster, easier, higher quality. And European colonization is like, if you had a solid navy and were a country, you were pretty much scaling the globe, trying to find your plots of land that you want to stake your claim in. So it was around this time that our boy, George Christoph Lichtenberg, burst onto the scene in Germany whenever he was born. He had quite a large family. He was the youngest of 17. Youngest of 17. That's a big number. And I think I also remember reading that only 5 of them made it out of childhood. Be thankful for what we have today. That was the reason why they had so many. Susie and George, they're not going to make it, so we should probably just keep having kids. It's tough. Anyways, his Protestant pastor father introduced him at an early age to the world of academia. Because of that early introduction, George would soon find himself at Göttingen University. A couple years into his studying at Göttingen University, I don't know if I'm saying this right. Göttingen. If you're German, please correct me. He was at Göttingen University and shortly became the assistant to the professor of physics and eventually gained the professorship just a couple years after that. So he was rocking and rolling. He was loving life, had free reign to do whatever he wanted. He was like, I'm gonna mess around with static electricity. So that's what he did. One day in 1777, 35-year-old George was jiving in his lab and he was trying to discover things. He had constructed this huge electrophorus. Apparently it's just like a generator for static electricity. It's just like a guy in his lab messing around with electricity. It's a miracle that he did live to his late 40s, I guess. He was messing around with static electricity, dust particles, and charged resin plates. Whenever he made his career-defining discovery, his discovery of the basic principle of modern xerographic copying, essentially a catalyst or an indirect contribution to the invention of the modern photocopier some 150 years later in the 1930s. From my understanding, he helped out in the field of early photography and copying. Well done, George. Well done. So within those experiments at his time in Göttingen, he had discovered these fractal images that he referred to as, believe it or not, he named it after himself, Lichtenberg figures. Essentially, it's capturing the movement of electrical discharges. So while we in the past, and still currently, refer to these images as Lichtenberg figures, was our boy Georgie the one to invent or figure out that you could do this on wood? No, he was not. There isn't any one person attributed to discovering this. It's emerged more as a collective development by artists and craftspeople experimenting with the principles of electrical discharge and material conductivity. Ha! Essentially, it's a modern technique with an artistic application, combining science and art and utilizing wood to create really cool patterns on the surface of that wood. That's probably the easiest way to think about it. So there's your history lesson for the day. So once I had finalized the pathing of the burning that I'd be doing, where I'd be doing it and kind of how I wanted it to look, I could finally start doing the fractal burning.
Insanely dangerous.
Also, quick disclaimer, do not attempt this at home. I am an untrained professional. I am a trained professional. Please do not try this at home if you do not know what you're doing. I had all of these pieces of hickory sanded up to 120 grit. So like whenever you're doing fractal burning, make sure you have as close to a smooth surface as possible. It allows for the pattern and the pathing. Pretty much it's just better. It just looks better. It's like better details is better. Just make sure you got your sanded. So like these really thick rubber mats. I lay one sheet down on top of the table where I'm working, and I put one on the floor so I can stand on it. So along with the fractal burning kit that I bought off of Amazon, also came with these ridiculous electrical gloves. I won't call them ridiculous because, well, they are kind of ridiculous. They just make me feel like a very special superhero. Very special. But they do keep you safe. Wear them if you do it. Also, make sure you're like in a very well-lit environment. Being able to see and light helps. Whenever you're doing this technique, I mean, you're literally burning wood, right? So try to do this outside if you can. And if not that, make sure you're in your garage or some kind of room or space that has easy access, a window or a garage door, and get some fans blowing outside. And if you were really going full safety up in this shit, I'd recommend wearing a gas mask too. That chemical solution, as you're burning it, it's gasifying that solution into the air around you. And the little bit of dabbling that I did with it in the past. I also messed about with 3 different chemicals. The one that people most use is sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda. I also messed around with magnesium sulfate, which is Epsom salt. It's good for the skin if you do a nice soak with some warm water. And this stuff I also got off of Amazon. Doesn't really seem like something you should or could be able to get, but yeah, they sell it. Potassium hydroxide pellets. I was a little worried whenever I was experimenting with the potassium hydroxide. Once I discovered this brush that was soaking overnight, I made the calculated decision to not use it because its bristles were gone and
dissolve the bristles on this brush entirely.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend potassium hydroxide. Out of the 3, baking soda definitely had the best results. For my mixture, I never really measured an amount. It's kind of like eyeballing it. I kind of just took a cup to it and dumped in like maybe way more than was needed. To those that are looking to do it, let it soak in so the surface looks damp or wet.
If you just put it down and try to start electrocuting it immediately, it doesn't work as well.
And don't be like me. Even with all of the safety precautions that I took, I shocked myself 3 times in the same day and started a small fire in the process. Started to notice a little light in the base of one of the handles. A minute went by and I started to notice this little light start to grow. That's when I was like, that might be a flame. It's probably on fire.
Wait, okay, that's really not good.
And I just remember watching it, and I was just like, I'm so close to being done. This thing can burn as much as it wants, just so long as it keeps working.
They're both still going, but the handle's on fire.
It's so close to being done, though.
I don't know what to do.
Stab it. Stab it. No. Then in a moment of smoke and haste, just wanting to wrap up for the day. I wisely decided to go against every one of my safety precautions, a truly absolute and complete disregard to everything that I have shared with you up to this point about safety. With the rubber gloves on that I had on earlier, I literally was just shoving these wires back into the base of the handle, like moving it around, moving the wire and the handle in tandem to make sure, like, one, it would remain connected, and two, so that I could just finish it and be done with that day. So it's totally a case of do as I say, not as I do. It's cool to see, as I was using the paintbrush to go back over the charred areas, as I was pulling up some of that black charredness in the brush, it was distributing it across the surface of the wood, acting as like a stain almost. It's kind of cool. It just like darkened the surface of this hickory wood. So I let the pieces dry for a full day, came back in the next day, and then I've sanded using 120 grit, a mix of Scotch-Brite pads and 120 grit sandpaper, bringing some of the lighter parts of the wood back up, because dousing it with charred baking soda, water, a mixture was definitely darkening the hickory. I also ended up going back and scraping out every single baking soda filled groove from the burning to really make these patterns pop. I also didn't want any leftover charred baking soda coming up whenever I went to go apply the finish. With all the pieces sanded and brought back where I was like, yeah, I could probably get a finish on, that's exactly what I did. I moved on to the finish. I decided to use the sealing epoxy because the cracks from the burning over time, like if you just left them untreated, it would just not look great after a couple of years outside. It would just look a lot better for a lot longer using the sealing epoxy. I put 2 coats of that on, very satisfying. It was just night and day from what those pieces were the day before to what they looked like after I had applied this sealing epoxy to them. And then I went back. I just wasn't a fan of how glossy it was. Yeah, so the way I see it, the glossiness of the epoxy finish is kind of taken away from the fractal burning. So I'm going to degloss it with some 320 grit sandpaper so that the burning can do the shining. I then paused to do the final assembly of the bench, putting it all back together once and for all. And then I applied this satin polyurethane as the final top coat finish. And wham bam shalam. Would you look at that? That's a real nice bench. She's absolutely gorgeous. But this story isn't over quite yet. You might be asking yourself, how exactly does this bench relate to the unhealthy safety culture in Western society? So to speak on that fear-driven safety culture, I'm trying to shed some light on it so that we can kind of live in a better world where people aren't just absolutely insane about certain things of like, no, we can't do that, like that's not allowed, like policies and procedures, deeming what is right and what is wrong. I just remember whenever I was doing this research, reading all of the articles I did, almost every single one was like, do not try this, not worth the risk, you'll die. And like, yeah, dangerous activity, no doubt. You should take precaution and understand the risks and dangers associated with it. But at the same time, like with anything else online and in the world, there will always be extremes on either end of a spectrum. I always try my best to remain open to hearing different opinions and perspectives, regardless of the source. It's a good way to go about being in the world. You really never know when you might learn something new, but taking everything seen and heard with a grain of salt is equally as important. Like, truly try to form your own opinions about something in order to gain a better understanding of our reality. And then being able to relay that truth back to others. Endlessly, but necessarily refining truth and reality. Overwhelmingly, the response online, do not try this, not worth the risk, you'll die. And I fully acknowledge the risks and potential dangers that come with doing fractal burning. And just like with everything today, it's like all about safety, and as if that's the way that we were supposed to live our lives. Like, no, it's the farthest thing. You're gonna go out in the world. You're gonna get hurt, whether that's emotional or physical. It's just bound to happen. It's going through those experiences that allow you to grow and move forward in life. We've gotten to a point in Western society that it's just a constant propagation of fear, of things not to do, and people saying, like, we should do this and we should not do that. But in my opinion, I believe it's better to live life fully. Pursue a life that is truly worth living. Pursuing new experiences for that passion, for that truth, and for those challenges that allow you to grow. It's like the essence of life, moving forward. It's what we all have to do to get out of wherever we are, if it's a not so great place, because that's what ultimately leads to wisdom and growth. No matter your age or background, it doesn't matter. You must be willing to stare down fear in whatever form it manifests in your life, whether that's stress, anxiety, depression, whatever you got going on. And we all got something. Trust me. Like, we're in it together. You're not alone in that. Everyone has that struggle. Some might not like to admit it, but they do. And I'm sure to some of you, this might sound like, just like, what's he talking about? It's either willingly forging ahead on that path of continuously stepping into the unknown, or it's remaining shrouded in that fear that is all-consuming, and it will never allow you to become everything that you could be. And we could all be so much more than what we are. And please take all of that with a grain of salt. Oh yeah. Our boy Georgie was also a little bit of a writer. He wrote aphorisms, which are essentially one-liners. So I'll read this one to you, going along with what I was talking about. I cannot say whether things will get better if we change. What I can say is that they must change if they are to get better. Yeah, I feel like that's a solid way to sum this up. Thanks so much for hanging out today. My name is Kyle. This is Constant Woodworks, and that was the story of how this lightning-like bench came to be. If you have any feedback, I'd greatly appreciate and encourage you to share in the comments below. And if you felt so inclined to like or subscribe, I'd appreciate that as well. It would help out the channel with whatever it is that I'm trying to do with this, because it's like woodworking, but the other stuff that I talked about. It is all just food for thought, by the way. Until next time, peace out, Girl Scouts.